Bye, bud.
I have to tell you that 3 years ago, I asked a question on the Hunting BC online forum: what can a person do to get involved to help wildlife in this province? I had no idea it was going to mean this. This is quite a day. We've had people who've taken time off of work, who've paid their own expenses to make a trip. We have people who've flown here on airplanes, they've stayed in hotels, they spent thousands of dollars and come from all corners of the province. As far away as Prince George, Dawson Creek, Fort St. John, Kimberley, Cranbrook, Port Hardy, and a very special guest from Powell River. People who are here are engineers, they're firemen, they're policemen, they're lawyers, they're accountants, truck drivers, laborers. You come from all walks of life. Never before have resident hunters felt so compelled to take a Monday off of work and assemble in front of the Legislature to help ensure British Columbians access to a public resource. People are not here because it's convenient. People are not here because it's convenient or because it affects their job. People have come here because they care about British Columbians' ability to access a public resource, and first and foremost, they care about wildlife. So who am I? Who am I? My name is Sean Richardson. I'm a resident hunter. I grew up in the heart of the Caribou, in 100 Mile House in the late 70s and early 80s. Fishing with my family and hunting with my grandfather and my close friends was a way of life. We took great pride in harvesting organic fish, meat, mushrooms, berries. If we could collect it in nature, we would consume it. With twice as many hunters as we have today, moose used to be open on a 3-month general open season. And over the last 30 years, successive governments have managed hunters instead of managing wildlife. Now in the Caribou, residents have to put in for limited entry draw just to have the opportunity to hunt moose. The Caribou is only one example. I don't think this policy and the direction of wildlife management in British Columbia are going in the right direction. Government has promised to significantly increase wildlife branch funding to manage wildlife, and we have yet to see it. We need to stop trying to manage a diminishing resource through social management, and we need to start working towards making more wildlife. I know there's people in the crowd today who are non-hunters, and they've taken their time out of their day to come and support our cause. And I'm sure that those people are concerned about their access to view wildlife and access wildlife, and that's why they're here. And I want you to know, to the non-hunters in the crowd, we absolutely appreciate your support. Allocation issue is not a new story. Over 150 years ago, conservationists from across North America came together and began to organize themselves. Market hunting and commercialization of wildlife had taken its toll on wildlife populations, and they were beginning to disappear. North America was headed in the same direction as Europe, where biodiversity was in decline and commercialization had resulted in the overexploitation of key wildlife species. Something had to change. Founding fathers included the United States President Theodore Roosevelt and Canadian Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier. These were people who believed wildlife should be managed by the public and for the public. They believed wildlife is held in the public trust and that no one can own or privatize it.
Hear, hear.
What these founding fathers of North American wildlife conservation model had in mind and promoted is miles away from what British Columbia is doing today. We have a system that is fundamentally flawed, where hunting opportunities are increasingly reserved for the rich. British Columbians feel they're being treated as a second-class citizen in their own province. Over the last 10 years, resident hunter numbers have increased over 20%, from 85,000 to over 100,000. Hunting is again popular in BC. Food security is becoming a huge issue, and the shift to the 100-mile diet is putting new boots out in the woods. People want to know where their meat comes from, and they want to know that it's sustainable. And people are just now starting to figure out what we've known for decades. Hunting is part of our life, just like the rivers we fish, the mountains we hike, and the air we breathe. The fastest growing segment of the hunting population is women and youth. My own children hunt, and they fish. And we cherish the time that we spend together out away from the crowds, out in nature. My kids can differentiate between fish, wildlife, and bird species. They're interested in what makes good habitat. They're aware of nature, and they care about healthy wildlife populations. I believe we need to all work together to make sure that our children and grandchildren have the same access to wildlife that we've enjoyed. In most jurisdictions, non-resident hunters are given between 5 and 10% of the tags. And they can hunt with a guide outfitter if they want to, or they can go on a self-guided hunt. In BC, we have given guide outfitters exclusive right to guide non-resident hunters. And on top of that, government has decided it's going to privatize 20 to 40% of wildlife for species such as moose, elk, goats, and sheep. The deal for guide outfitters in British Columbia exists nowhere else in North America. What direction are we headed as a province? Will there be a day when 40% of the lakes, streams, and rivers are closed off to British Columbians? When 40% of provincial parks are reserved for only their guides and their clients? When 40% of Crown land owned by British Columbians can only be used by non-residents?
Like how?
Today is one step in a marathon where British Columbians come together to ensure future generations have access to fish, wildlife, and the wild spaces in BC. You should be extremely proud that you are here to support your fellow British Columbians who care about wild spaces and wildlife. It is clear the BC government is not representing their constituents or the best interests of British Columbians. This is a new approach for conservationists in British Columbia. Resident hunters have been generally apathetic and slow to shift about this slow shift towards a privatization of our public resources. We can't do that any longer. Today, we are engaging our elected officials. We need to take control. We need to advocate for fish, wildlife, and wild spaces in this province. No one else is going to do it for us. On that note, we have some very special guests who would like to speak today about the allocation policy. These guests represent a broad spectrum of political parties who are working on behalf of residents in order to make a change within government. Before asking these people to speak, we would like to thank them all for their support. We would also like to give them a very strong message. Many of us have not made up our minds as to which parties or candidates we're going to support in the next election. It's up to individual politicians to win our support. We believe it is the duty of MLAs to represent their constituents. We believe in the scientific management of wildlife and not further management of hunters. Yes. We believe in the political process, and that's why we're here today. This is part of the political process. I've never protested in my life, and here I am. Yeah. But that's part of the process. We strongly believe that wildlife should not be privatized, and we're going to make our own decisions accordingly. Thank you.